Perhaps he decided on one of these lonely nights to ask for her hand in marriage and to someday become the owner of Buffalo Mercantile. This we'll never know. However, we do know that John Carl served America bravely and proudly. After returning safely home to the ever-welcoming and familiar surroundings of his aunt's plantation in 1922, John Carl married Pearl. He was 26 years old and Pearl was 16 years old. He and Pearl lived comfortably with Aunt Alice for about 2 years, until the spirit and determination of this entrepreneur pushed John Carl to seek out a partner in Claude Payne to purchase the Buffalo Mercantile Company. In 1924, a horse-drawn covered wagon carrying the Todd and Payne families launched a course for Buffalo Cove, North Carolina, and the Buffalo Mercantile Company. John Carl's dream was nearly destroyed before it began when Mr. Payne unexpectedly decided not to go through with the partnership before the wagon ever reached its destination. The story has long been told that somewhere along the way, the wagon would become stuck on the muddy trail. Perhaps Mr. Payne saw this as a bad omen. We'll never know for sure. We do know that the young couple was now facing an extremely pivotal crossroads in their lives. Should they turn back to Elk Creek and the security of the Hodge plantation, or should they forge ahead with a considerable deficit of funds? John Carl had a new young bride to consider, and they were looking forward to starting a family. After much soul-searching, courage and determination outweighed any doubts they had. The decision was made to bravely approach several of the locals, most of whom had only recently met John Carl, and convince them to loan him the funds he needed to complete the purchase of the Buffalo Mercantile Company. On April 20th, 1924, Todd's Place was born. This is the only known photograph of the property John Carl and Pearl purchased in 1924. On the left, we see the house they moved into, and on the right is the store. The land consisted of some 40 acres. It's obvious they had their work cut out. Notice the cart path leading to the store, which seems to go through a downed cornfield. Together, they worked hard and tirelessly to make a go of it. 1 year later, on June 4th, 1925, they were blessed with their firstborn, a beautiful baby girl they named Nina Elizabeth. With hard work and determination, they paid the money back to the locals that they had borrowed in a short amount of time. Today, we think of a small store as a convenience store selling general merchandise and gasoline. In the 1920s, Todd's Place was all things to all people. It was the grocery store, the pharmacy, the feed, seed, and grain store, the post office, the barber shop, the clothing store, the automotive store, the veterinary store, but perhaps most importantly, it was a place for the locals to talk, listen to the battery-powered radio, tell jokes, gossip, and just generally get together. The term general store most certainly applied to Todd's place. The feed was sold in cotton sacks with different colors and designs. The story is told that when men would come to Todd's place to buy sacks of feed, the wife would accompany them to pick out the appropriate sack desired from which to make dresses and clothing. Unlike today, it was a time when folks made everything count. Absolutely nothing was wasted. 2 years and 1 day after the birth of Nina Elizabeth, the couple was once again blessed. This time it was a fine son, which they named Buna Odell. Then only 1 year and 2 days later, another son was born. He was named Joseph Riley. His namesake was John Carl's grandfather, Colonel Joe Todd. Colonel Joe had been the mayor of Boone, North Carolina, served in the Spanish-American and Civil Wars. He was elected to the legislature in 1872, and then in 1882, the office of clerk of the Superior Court, which he held for 12 years after the close of the Civil War. Things seemed to be going well for the Todds and our country in general when about a year later, on October 29th, 1929, Black Tuesday occurred. For those of you that are not familiar with Black Tuesday, it was the beginning of the Great Depression. With the crash of the stock market, it was one of the most devastating times in American history. As a result, over 6,000 banks went out of business. Over 9 million savings accounts vanished. 85,000 businesses went bankrupt. Some 13 million people were unemployed. Over 400,000 family farms were repossessed by the bank. 2,600 schools were closed. Admissions to state mental hospitals went up by 300%. 2 million men became homeless and wandering the country. Suicides went up by some 30%. The Great Depression had begun. Currency became almost a thing of the past in rural Buffalo Cove and much of the country. John Carl and Pearl once again faced impending disaster. As serious as this time was, it almost certainly pales in comparison of how a similar event would affect folks today, since the mountain residents decades ago were pretty much self-sufficient in raising their own food, making their own clothing by hand, cutting wood for heat, and cooking, and so on. Todd's place survived this dilemma by bartering. There is controversy as to how long the Great Depression lasted. Some sources say it was pretty much over by 1933. Others say it was not actually over until 1939, when the remaining 15% of unemployed Americans found work filling orders from overseas for armaments and munitions for the beginning of World War II. Needless to say, it would be a slow and painful climb to reach the level of business Todd's place enjoyed prior to that fateful day in October of 1929.